Welcome back. I'm Ric Blackwell. Last segment, we talked about the president giving himself an A+ for 2014. Our next guest, though, is at the top of the Dean's list. That would be Ed Dean, the popular radio host of the Ed Dean Radio Show. He joins us on Newsmax. Ed, how you doing?
Rick, Happy New Year.
Really appreciate you coming in. Let's get right to it. A lot of things to talk about in 2014. Right. Unfortunately, we could be having this discussion in 2013. We could be having this discussion in 1913. Race relations, always such a big topic in America. What do you make of what happened this year in Ferguson, Missouri, and some other places?
If you wanted to narrow this down, Rick, on winners and losers, the whole Ferguson thing has turned out to be a big loser. Before the 2014 November elections, in the months of September and October, those in states of Alabama, Maryland, North Carolina, and Florida were all having these ads run on black radio stations, also put on black churches of cars out there about that if you elect more white Republicans, for example, in Maryland, we were going to have more Fergusons, we have more Trayvon Martins. In Alabama, there were ads out there being run that if you elect more white Republicans, that again, we'll go back to Ferguson and we'll have the Klans come back. And of course, the NAACP and those of the liberal left in the black community sat back and pleaded the fifth. Everybody wants to talk about race relations, but it's always at their terms. What we have been saying and advocating, for example, on the radio show and some good commentary, is that what the black community does not need is another street named after Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. It does not need another high school named after Rosa Parks. What the black community needs is free market economics. We need another business on Martin Luther King Jr. Street. We need a big business next to Rosa Parks High School. If we want to talk about race relations, let's also talk about economics. Everything has to do with race. I believe if you want to turn those in the black community around, the poor communities, free market economics is the answer.
All right, race relation again, big in 2014. We'll be watching it, of course, next year as well. Want to talk to another international, talk about how that made news this past 12 months.
Ebola was an issue that should not have been political, but it was political. For example, if you looked at the Arkansas race with Mark Pryor, the senator, and Tom Cotton, the Republican congressman out there, Mark Pryor was running ads saying that the problems with Ebola coming into this country had to do with low amount of funding from the Republicans. Blame Tom Cotton for not funding NIH, that's the National Institute of Health out there, for not funding enough money. And for that reason why Ebola was becoming an epidemic, remember, just a few months ago. Then the right made it political because you saw Casey Hitchcox, who was an Obama supporter out there. And remember, that was the young gal, the nurse up there who had been in contact with an Ebola patient. She was going to be quarantined. She basically had an motion filed with a circuit judge up there. The circuit judge says you're violating her civil rights. And of course, those on the right went all haywire and said this is all political out there. She's an Obama hack. This is an issue that should have not been political. We have 1,400 cases that the CDC is following on people potentially that may have been in contact with Ebola. The bottom line here is I think those on the right are right on this issue, not to sound redundant there, but because how is it that you sit back and say, well, when it comes to foreigners coming from Sierra Leone and those in West Africa, that we don't want to quarantine them, we don't want to stop them to make sure that they're not bringing over an epidemic in this country. And I think the president was wrong on that issue.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting how it was sort of a political football prior to the midterm elections, and it really did sway some races heading into those November elections. Want to talk about climate change right now? If you look at the weather, one of the hottest years in 2014, but I want to get your take on where we are right now with climate change, with Keystone coming up and, of course, key energy policies being discussed. Where do you think we are right now with the left talking about climate change and the right defending energy companies?
It's going to be very interesting. As you know, the left loves to attack those that talk about tax cuts to ExxonMobil or Mobil Exxon and all the other oil companies, BP. The bottom line is that these guys get the same tax cuts that regular manufacturers underneath the tax code get in this country. Now, there's a big argument out there about subsidies and everything else from the left. Keystone Pipeline, which is very interesting here. This is a government project. The president was very hip about promoting government projects in 2009, 2010 through stimulus. This is a government project that the left would normally love, but they don't like it. Why? Because it promotes more real clean energy and it promotes more self-depending on America being independent when it comes to oil reserves here. The bottom line is this has turned out to be another big political issue. The right, yes, they want to have those conservative issues and tax breaks for the oil companies out there. This is a Keystone Pipeline will not go away.
Got to cut you off there. You can tell this man is passionate. When we come back, Ed Dean's going to talk more about the issues of 2014.